Next up, for our second panel, second to last talk of the day, we have the next billion use cases. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Clem, our product lead at Safe. He'll be moderating. We're getting a couple of mics set up, so it'll be a second. We also have Andreas, co-founder of Fileverse, who we heard from earlier. Gísli, CTO and co-founder of Monerium. Eskender, head of product and strategy at ENS. And Cassidy, the co-founder at Centrifuge Network.
Welcome, everyone, on our panel for the second panel of the day. My name is Clem. I'm working at Safe as the product lead for Safe Core. And the title of this panel is Next Billion Use Cases. I very much like it because as soon as we started earlier this year talking about account abstraction, we had a few headlines where people jumped on the idea that account abstraction would unlock somehow 1 billion users. And so I want to dig a little bit deeper into that, just because actually, factually, we are very far from 1 billion. If you are looking at the numbers, at best, we have 420 million crypto owners, which do not necessarily qualify as users. And active user estimations typically range between 30 to 60 million users. So, that being said, I'd like for everyone here to introduce themselves first. And I want the format of that conversation to be open, so any question can, be answered by anyone, and we can also just go with the flow. But I'd love to hear about you, and first, just let us know what you are working on and what you're most excited about right now in Web3. And maybe we can start with you.
Okay, cool. Hey everyone, I'm Andreas. I'm the co-founder of Fileverse. We're creating a trustless collaboration platform. So a way for you to move away from Notion, Google Workspace, all that stuff. And what am I the most excited for in Web3? I think there are some hardware projects that are coming out from Web3 that are quite interesting. I'm not going to name that specific one, but there is a project that's working on mesh networks, and they're already establishing some towers in Athens, where I come from. And I think this is a very interesting way of bringing internet connection and crypto applications to people. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Hi, my name's Eskender. I'm working on ENS. What am I interested in Web3? Like right now, I think I'm interested in seeing how people start building for consumer applications. I think there's a ton of infrastructure, and I think we're starting to actually get to the point where you could build a consumer experience that doesn't totally suck.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Cassidy. I work at Centrifuge. Centrifuge is a project that's bringing real-world assets on-chain, getting them access to financing. That is really the use case that I'm focused on. I think we're an interesting project because we're building infrastructure and a real product for users at the same time. And it's definitely a hard balance to find. I mean, we've been going at it for 5 years already, and it feels like we're still very far from achieving what our original goal was. But definitely getting there. And I think for this conversation, looking at account abstraction, it's definitely with that lens of how much it's really going to improve our product, actually. And I do think it does have the potential to bring in the next billion users. It's just a matter of time, but we can get into that.
Okay, interesting one. Maybe last introduction?
Yeah, hey, I'm Gísli. That's Gísli without the R, for those who can't pronounce Icelandic names. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Monerium. For those who don't know what Monerium is yet, we are the authorized issuer of the EUROE stablecoin, which is driving the backend for projects like Gnosis Pay. We are future compliant with MiCA, and we have integrated into the SEPA system. So every user that onboards with Monerium actually gets an IBAN that is associated to their address. So you can move seamlessly from the European banking system onto a blockchain in a matter of seconds. So essentially interconnecting the 11 trillion euros worth of cash in the European banking system and allowing it to freely flow onto a blockchain and back. So what I mostly, there are so many things in Web3 that can catch your attention. But if you'd ask me what would you be doing if you weren't doing Monerium, it would probably be something related to zero-knowledge proofs. They are mostly known right now for scaling. So they're the technology behind the Gnosis Pay layer 2 rollup, for example. But there's another property in which you can sort of implement privacy. And I think that's actually what is needed to get to the next billion use cases, or billion users. So I can maybe double click on that a little later.
Okay, cool. Super interesting. Well, I mean, maybe that question is specific, or I want to follow up on something you mentioned, Cassidy, about like account abstraction and how it will impact you in your current product context. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that and how you see account abstraction helping your user base?
I think one of the key things for Centrifuge, I mean, in the last panel, Stefan actually mentioned that most of the users in DeFi are crypto native. But for us, it's actually different. We're unique in the sense that most of our users are actually TradFi. They're just businesses trying to get loans. And for us, that comes with, I would call it table stakes. Like really what the bare minimum is that they need are things like privacy on chain, being able to whitelist accounts, and enable those accounts to do certain things within the Centrifuge application. And a lot of those things have been very difficult to implement on Ethereum. And so we actually were originally on Ethereum, moving over to our own chain for a lot of customization of that logic. But DeFi still exists on Ethereum. And I think being able to bring these key features that come with account abstraction, like the privacy, like being able to whitelist accounts, tie KYC to different accounts, is really important. And I think it's basically like if you're one of these users that's using a bank account in the traditional financial system, and you come over to DeFi, you're expecting the same sort of experience, right? You want to be able to have those same expectations that you do when you log into your bank account. And I think this is where account abstraction really helps us to get to.
Actually, I have a follow-up question to this. If we're thinking in terms of verticals and the ones where we can imagine which one would be benefiting the most from account abstraction, are we thinking that traditional finance and more back-end related products are likely going to be benefiting from AA first, or are we thinking that end-user products are going to be ultimately the first one implementing those technologies and getting the benefits of it? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say it's hard to say who would get the most benefits, because when you talk about account abstraction, you get a host of benefits. Like DeFi probably cares a lot about being able to batch transactions, right? But then consumers probably care a lot about like being able to choose how they authenticate their accounts. So I think the different benefits you get can be applied across verticals. It's hard to say which one benefits more, at least from my perspective. But yeah, that's my 2 cents there.
Yeah, I can maybe grab that ball. I think you're completely right. And from where we're sitting, we're seeing right now everything come together. And account abstraction is a crucial part of that journey. So if you think about you released the Safe Core AA SDK. It's a horrendous name, but like, let's go with it. And it's just too complicated to. You want my hot take? This is a hot take. So it's just too hard to pronounce. Anyways, so what's coming together there is essentially one SDK that has different kits, right? And like you mentioned, you can have like WebAuth3 native onboarding with your Google account and then slowly migrate to something safer, right? You have the RAMP kit, which allows you to send computation or initiation of transfers to Gelato, where you can actually have gasless payments or pay in another token. And then on the on-ramping part, you have Monerium. So we actually spoke to a lot of teams at ECC, for example, that are ex-Revoluters, ex-Venmo, ex-PayPal product persons that are now coming into our industry and replicating that user experience. And account abstraction and the SDK that you provide is a crucial component for that. So imagine you can simply just focus on that user experience and not have to think about all the things that they have had to do in the past. So a user using one of those new types of neobank applications can simply use their username and password to get an account. They would then receive 100 euros from the banking system, and now they have that in their account. They don't have any crypto yet, but that's okay, because the app can then initiate a payment to Gelato, which actually converts that URI into USDC. So this kind of experience is already being built. And yeah, so I think to your point, for consumer applications, for neobank applications, this will be hugely important.
And do you think DeFi as a... Oh, please carry on.
Sorry, just because we're talking a lot about finance, I'm going to give my biased take, which is non-financial applications and use cases. This is where it will be most obvious why account abstraction is completely revolutionizing the space, and it will actually allow a lot of people to come in through the front door as everyday users and for everyday activities online. So I completely get what the other panelists are talking about, but it would be interesting to see, at least across the space, more people take account abstraction as this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to actually go after where most of the internet traffic is happening today. It feels like we're all setting up shop for the past 10 years in the back alley of a village to sell our crypto products, instead of going in front of the mall where everybody is going, which is, let's say, I don't know, Facebook or Google Workspace, and be like, hey, come here, we have a better offering. We're still a small shop, but this is how you can switch.
But is it a better offering, though? The question is the value proposition of decentralization enough to even onboard a next 100 million users? Do they get to see the benefits of self-custody and decentralization in other contexts than decentralized finance?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing question. Why? Because it is actually account abstraction that can finally give us the opportunity to say, hey, it is a better offering. Why? If you see, I don't know if anyone has already done it, but on your Apple devices, you can enable end-to-end encryption of your iCloud account and have social recovery. Who was doing social recovery way before Apple even put it on their product manager's roadmap? We had that in crypto. So those types of use cases, I think this is something that we can still show that, hey, it's not a super technical and niche thing that we're offering. Of course, amazing UX, same kind of offering, but with the benefits of right to exit, GDPR compliant, and give people the ability to have my father and my brother as people that can recover my account if something bad happens to me. So yeah. Sorry, Yeah,
I would just want to add, I think the use cases for consumer too are different in that in DeFi, everybody talks about how their product is a protocol. And I think we don't need a million protocols, right? We need a few, and then we should build things on top of it. So I think in the account abstracted world, we could do things like you have Web3 authentication into a Netflix, and then you can create sub-accounts that are your friends, and then if your friends use your Netflix in a trusted way, you could make them pay you back for how much of your Netflix that they used. And I can't do that today in a Web 2 environment, but in a Web 3 environment, I could set the rules for how you can use my authentication, and that's kind of sick.
While I'm not disagreeing with the panelists at all, I think the cohort that comes next is actually DeFi, so bear with me. So I was talking to the teams earlier, that are ex-PayPal teams building on top of this. And you know what the reason why they're building on DeFi? most of like fintech and neobanks today are essentially just about recreating the tech stack of a bank. It's no real innovation, right? DeFi actually allows them and has innovated more in the past 10 years than traditional finance has done over the last 50 or 100 years even. What we're missing is that user experience, and those teams, they tell me, whenever they wanted to push out a feature on PayPal that didn't relate to anything, it was a minor feature, they had to coordinate with over 500 persons globally within PayPal. And now you start to understand why fintech is that, almost. When they're not having custody of the user assets, they can just focus on delivering the best user experience. So I think the next cohort, and where the most value is to be had, is actually to take a neobank experience, but just with a 5-person team instead of like a 500-person company. And the rest will follow, I agree, but I think it's happening in this order.
Yeah.
That's bullish. Sounds good. I mean, sounds good for all of us in this room interested in this topic. Maybe one question though is, we're saying, how do we get to have developers, and maybe that's a biased point of view, from someone working at Safe, but for me it feels that even in the context of account abstraction, we see a lot of infrastructure projects popping up, but actually fairly few product application teams building applications that are widely successful on top of that stack. How do you think we can organize that change, that shift, and spread that drive to developers, and maybe also outside of Web3 developers?
I think it's there already. It's done. Account abstraction. It's a shit ton of front-end developers, UX, UI people from the Web2 world that really know how to create amazing user experiences, that are just ready to come in, that don't have to think anymore, okay, how does the smart contract work? How do I remove the access from that user? How do I delegate this and that? We are actually seeing we're often talking about users for account abstraction, but I'm seeing this big shift between back-end developers to front-end developers, and I'm super excited. I'm seeing a lot of teams that are just full of front-end devs and UX, UI people that are just so excited not to have to deal with the complexity of blockchain anymore, and just have things that they understand.
I do think it's just been the reality that if you did want to build in the space, you had to work on infrastructure at some point in your product. It has never been really possible to only focus on a front-end app really in the space, unfortunately. And I do think, I would agree that having things like account abstraction are really the next step to get to a place where it is possible to just be a front-end developer and build something really interesting and valuable without having to deal with all of this other complexity in the back end. And I think from here, hopefully we will see much faster growth in this industry in terms of actual consumer-facing products. And I do think DeFi has been what's gotten us there, because it's been by building these DeFi products that we've actually come up with a lot of these standards that are going to be applied to every other consumer-facing product in the future. But it's really been, a longer journey than maybe some of us expected, but it's been a journey of building the infrastructure, building the rails, the foundation, to be able to get to that point.
Yep.
Yeah, I think one of your questions there was why is infrastructure being so heavily focused on? I think there's two components, financial and social. There's this social component, which is there are not really a lot of users. And so when you're trying to discover a problem to solve, a lot of it tends to be tooling. And so then a lot of infrastructure gets built. And then when there's not a lot of users, then valuations for the things you want to build are much better on the infrastructure side. So I think there's financial and social reasons why so much infrastructure is being built. I'm actually way less bullish on maybe the other panelists on where we are today. I think you couldn't just grab some JavaScript dev off the street and be build a crypto app. I don't really feel
the panel there. Sounds like it. You're very bullish, guys.
We should be. That's why we're still building, in the bear. But I do think there's a lot of tooling that needs to be created, particularly on the front end side, because it's like we can have these modular components where somebody could just like blindly say, this is how I use a transaction manager to manage transactions. I don't actually have to think about it, but like today you do have to think about that. And in this account abstracted world, it's actually a little weirder how transactions can occur and like how you would handle for that in the product, how you display error messaging to your users. Like there's still a lot of things that can be smoothed out, but
Well,
yeah.
yeah, actually, like talking about this specifically, what are key challenges you think we should still, overcome, even in the context where we're having, we secure a transition to smart accounts, we maybe reach privacy, good privacy standards and scalability. What are, still key, problems or blockers you see that could prevent us from getting to these billion users?
Yeah, for me personally, it's just building out additional front-end tooling, like libraries, like just like React components, things like this that will make building a good experience a lot simpler. That's integrating a lot of the like modular kind of like good technology that we're talking about. Until then, I don't see a world where you have like a ton of people building because it's still very complicated to build today. And like I said, like error handling when you're building against a blockchain is very different than when you're error handling for like a Web 2 product, and that actually really matters in the user experience because you can't communicate things very clearly today without giving them a lot of information that they really don't need.
You mentioned modular tooling. I think in order to get to that point, we also need much better standards. And I do think that, just to give you an example on the Centrifuge side, there's no real good standard for KYC on-chain. And I think that also needs to be applicable across chains. Bridges are also still pretty far out from having standards as well. And I think these are some of the like really basic things that we're going to need to be able to actually grow. So I don't think we're there yet. I am very bullish. I think we're going to get there, but I do think it's still going to be a lot of time. And one of the main ways we get to standards is by collaborating a lot better across teams. And I think this is, even in the bear, something that I'm personally still missing, that it feels like it's still very competitive. And I think part of that is financial in nature, that these teams are competing for same pot of capital to actually continue building. But unfortunately, what's actually going to help us all succeed is by collaborating and building these standards together. And I do think that's one of the key pieces still missing.
Yeah, I'm probably somewhere in between here. So I think we're on the cusp of actually having the tools needed. But I don't agree with the fact that we already solved privacy. I think if we want to reach 1 billion use cases, we need to have something where you can transact, and especially for companies, right? We're not going to be able to bring on the mass in terms of companies while everything is like an open checkbook to everyone to read. There are, of course, prominent solutions, but like this has not been solved in my mind yet. But like you mentioned, like developer tooling, I think you're right. There was an interesting project. Like the person that sat here a few minutes ago actually decided to build a dedicated 2-person team. They are blockchain knowledgeable, but they were able to build a product in a month where they could go from any token on any chain to an external bank account in 1 month. And so and one of the requirements that they had was that they couldn't rely on any other API that didn't already exist. So they were not allowed to create a backend to service some of the functionality they needed for this. And still, like the product was great. And I think I do agree, you can't take an average or even a phenomenal Web 2 developer yet. But for those that have a little bit of an understanding, it's getting so much more easier. So I think we're on the cusp.
Yeah. Just to Eskender's point, I think that we're saying the same thing, but maybe what Cassidy and I were pointing at is that there's a big obstacle that just is not there anymore. And now there are just a bunch of little obstacles, like tooling. But what I'm seeing is that those teams that were too afraid of the big obstacle that account abstraction took care of, now they're starting, and immediately they're contributing to a lot of open source libraries, and they're making they're preparing the terrain for new developers to come on board as well. So yeah, still a lot of obstacles, but the big one I think that was scaring off a lot of people, kind of, yeah.
I think I touched upon maybe talking a little bit about the most promising verticals within, within the industry in the context of AA. I don't know if you want to go back to that point, but if you don't, I'd be also curious to hear what you think are the least promising kind of projects at the moment. Not to be name dropping any, but are there particular areas or project types that you think are simply just doomed to fail and not catch on that adoption wave?
I'm gonna get crucified for this, but gaming. I think we're so far from the thing that everybody is hyper bullish for. Yeah. Like, have you tried any other games out there? The only one that I actually like is something that's super complex. It's for developers. It's like Dark Forest. Okay, super cool. But the rest is terrible.
I would second gaming. I think the reason why I think gaming is such a huge vertical is that gamers already are kind of used to the environment that we're talking about, right? Like, they know how to set up an environment for themselves. They know what it's like to have tokens, to transfer these things, to have assets in-game moving around, to have value. So I think a lot of the language and like things that get built into applications today could feel much more native to them. I think we have not attracted the best game developers. And now that we are removing more and more obstacles, I think there will be better and better games that will come out. So I think gaming. And then secondly, I think identity. Like my little Netflix example earlier, like those types of things I think are actually much more achievable than people are thinking about. I think how we leverage our identity and gets used across all these different experiences is something that's actually maybe the core problem of account abstraction we haven't solved yet, because it's great if I can like go into your app and it was super simple, but now I'm locked in. Like vendor lock-in is like a huge risk here. And so I think being able to figure out how to like appropriately fragment identity across these different experiences so that the user is really managing their one identity or whichever identities they're selecting for themselves, rather than every identity that gets forced on them by the application that they want to use.
Yeah. I like the identity thing, but please let it not be WorldCoin. Like if your response is, oh, they have good tech though, just take the orb, break it, take the parts, and leave. Just no need to adopt that shit. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I looked it up actually. There's an estimated 3 billion active gamers in the world. So if we cracked it, it could work. We have 2 minutes 30, and I am debating with myself whether I want to ask you how you see SAFE fitting in that picture of getting to the next billion users, because ultimately I want to share my project. But I'm also very keen to maybe have questions from the audience in case someone has a question, and it will be for you. Okay, I'm running to you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Just so it seems like we all agree that the UX is terrible. I agree with you. Privacy, big problem. I think we're going to need to tackle that a little bit harder to tackle. Now, a lot of, in crypto, all the value grab goes to the protocol. That's why we have like 1 million protocols. We don't need 1 million protocols. We need a couple core ones, and then we need apps on top of it. How do you guys see it going into the future? How are we going to incentivize UX creators to actually capture value too, so we have better UX?
Tough one.
I think the simple answer is better dApp design to capture value in a way that's not extractive from the user, right? I don't know how you do that, but if you can build your dApp really well in a way where you can monetize it while sitting on top of a protocol, that's that's probably the way. Right now, we don't have the tooling to make that feel simple for developers or that enable developers with the grit to pursue the hard way to really do it. Today, it's just much simpler to build a protocol and like try and capture value that way. So I think account abstraction is like the hurdle that will allow us to build all the components required to start to build the types of consumer experiences that builders can still receive value from while not detracting from like people's, ability to have trust or decentralization or all these things that we care about.
Yeah, I mean, I think account abstraction is actually great for those kind of builders. Now, if I go back to the DeFi example that I had earlier, where you have those ex-PayPal, Venmo teams, with account abstraction, they can batch together a transaction where they actually take a little bit of a fee from it. So I think that's the easy, like if your application depends on some sort of fees, either going to the protocol or actually just leveraging your fee on top of it. I think that's the sort of most straightforward way for those kind of applications. Obviously, it depends on what you're trying to build, but yeah, I would go that route.
And really quickly want to add, I think you can do like more traditional Web 2 monetization models. I think subscriptions and I think like typical SaaS operating things could work in this environment, right? Because we have paymasters and all this fun stuff. But I think it will take a lot of experimentation to see the right way to implement those types of payments. But users aren't afraid to pay for their apps, right? Like they're used to it if they're getting the right type of experience. And so I think being able to provide the experience will allow you to implement those types of monetization strategies.
Maybe, yeah, you wanted to say something? Tell that to the VCs, okay. Maybe my answer to that would be, it would be pretty interesting if we find a crypto way, a Web3 way of, I'm not a fan of advertisement at all, but it would be interesting to do it in a hyper privacy preserving way and way that maybe uses local LLMs or something like that for advertisement. And a good example is Brave. Brave is doing a pretty sweet, has a pretty sweet model that still requires some development, I would say, but you can choose your own ads. They're specific. You don't have to click on them. You get incentivized. The company itself also gets paid. Maybe something like that. Revenue sharing is definitely something that we could introduce in the space, and that it's not something that Web 2 projects will have in their mind. Oh yeah, let's share revenue with our users. Great idea.
All right. On these words, I want to thank you all for joining the panel today. I'm happy about how bullish you are. Actually, I was expecting a little bit more skepticism, but I should learn on my expectations. And yeah, big round of applause for these guys, please. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.